Thank you for coming. It's very nice of you. I'm really looking forward to the day. I hope you are. We have some excellent speakers. Well, I'm one of them, but and so that's a good indication of what's coming. But I just want to do some housekeeping stuff with you first. I think all of you have found the restrooms by now, just out the door and to the left, and then they're on the right. So that's pretty simple. For lunchtime, there's another restroom downstairs, so this one's full, which it gets full in a hurry. Lunch is served here, so you don't have to go out anywhere. It's a beautiful day, so feel free to sit outside if you want to do that. There's a labyrinth on the other side of the church building, so I think if you want to go visit that, that's nice too. So, oh, and be sure to fill out your evaluation form so you can get your credits. And you have to be here all day in order to get those credits. So just turn those in at the door after the awards are given. So, any questions about anything? If you turn off your cell phones or turn them down on vibrate just so it doesn't interrupt the presentations. And if you have any questions, I'll be in the back of the room. Jerry will be in the back of the room. We're here to help you all we can. And please have a wonderful day. And we'll get started. Thank you.
Okay, this conference is in its 20th year, and that's really special. The nursing conference has continued for that long, and it wouldn't continue unless you came, so we're glad you're here. I want to tell you a little bit about the Institute for Spirituality and Health. We've been in existence for 57 years, and our role is twofold. One, to add to the growing body of literature, research that is showing the connection between spirituality and health. There are over 3,000 articles have already been published. 80% at least have shown a positive correlation in almost every parameter you want to measure, including such things as sense of well-being, including frequency of hospital stay, length of hospital stay, such matters as your cholesterol level, your stress corticosteroids, those kind of things are measured and shown to be improved. If you are consistent, by the way, this is if you're consistent in your spiritual practices. You can't just occasionally go to church on Christmas or Easter and have it make any difference, or whatever religion you're a part of. It's a consistent practice that makes for health and improves healing. And one thing also is longevity. Believe it or not, those individuals that are consistent in a religious community over a long period of time add about 7 years to their life. And if you happen to be African American, you add 14 years to your life. I don't know the mystery of that, but if you've been to an African American church, they're very exciting, and quite often our Caucasian churches are very dull and boring. So that may be the difference, I don't know. But I want you to know this is real. So what you're going to pick up today are some skills, some talents that may help you in your important ministry, which it is, of nursing. And so I'm glad you're here. I want to introduce Dr. David Levy. He's become a close friend. I really care about him and respect him highly. He's from San Diego, a neurosurgeon, as you know from the literature that you've already read. He trained in medical school at Emory in Atlanta, and then he did his neurosurgical training in Phoenix, Arizona. Later, he went to Austria to do endoscopic neuropsychiatric surgery on things like arteriovascular malformations and aneurysms. So, of course, people that may have an aneurysm and near rupture, he would be able to go in from the groin and put pellets or whatever he does in the mystery just to solve that problem and save a life. So it's a very intricate and wonderful work that he's been doing. He's written many papers in the medical literature on the different aspects of endoscopic neurosurgery. His book, which I have right here, is on that back table in the corner. You're going to have to hunt for it, it looks like, but this book is for $10, is that right? Actually, his published price is $15, so he's got it back there in that box. For $10, it is wonderful. It's one of the best books I've read the last year, and I mean it. It really touches your heart. He's very transparent in telling about his walk as a physician, and then also how he came to using prayer in medicine. So I think you'd love it. It'd be a great Christmas gift to somebody. They won't last long. The last talk he gave was to about 25 psychotherapists yesterday morning. They gobbled all of them up, and about 12 of these. So at any rate, you will enjoy having this book if you, I don't want him having to tote them back. So buy them. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. David Levy.
It's a privilege to be here. I understand that this afternoon they're going to be awarding four of you the Nurses Spirituality Award. So that's a real honor. And the spirituality, compassion, commitment, and communication for Emma Josephine Wolfel McMorris are in the Spirituality Award. I like to hear that they are awarding and they're noticing in this community that people need spirituality. Well, I'm going to talk to you this morning a little bit about joy. Because joy is something we often don't think about until it's missing. A little better?
A little closer.
Like that?
Try it.
So joy is neurologically the most natural state for the brain. When a child is born and it's looking at its mother, after about three months, 12 weeks or so, the visual system comes online and is looking for joy in your eyes. And you can see how the eyes start to light up, and then your eyes light up, and then their eyes light up, and so this joy is going back and forth. Before that time, things like temperature, touch, the infant registers joy with those modalities. But our visual system very quickly sort of overrules everything else. And we generally get joy through the eyes. So the brain learns best in an atmosphere of joy. And joy, as I mentioned, is the basis for bonding. You will bond to anyone. A child will bond to anyone who gives them joy. I have a colleague of mine who he's a physician, his wife is a physician, and they have left their child with her mother, so the child's grandmother, and she's a little distressed now because after a year when she comes home, the child goes to the grandmother. But that is, it's not necessarily about who the mother is, it's about who's giving the child joy, because you will bond to someone who gives you joy. Interesting, the last point, joy gives strength to withstand trauma. It makes us resilient. So if you, many of us didn't get much joy in our childhood, and that means that when trauma comes our way, we're not as able to withstand it. The interesting thing about joy in the brain, we think that it is mainly held in the frontal lobes, the prefrontal cortex. That as the fetal neurochemistry you retain throughout your lifetime. So as a child, they think that when you start seeing a child really looking for your eyes, that is a sign that area of the brain is starting to really develop. They're looking for eyes. You see on airplanes, these kids will be looking around for someone's eyes, then they just light up. That area of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is looking for more joy. And then you'll notice after a certain amount of time, they can't take it anymore. They'll kind of look away. And that's sort of like being tickled too much. After a while, it's too much joy. And then they'll they will settle down and they'll look again, right? And then they'll want to do it again. This is the brain starting to build joy. And many of us and many people don't necessarily get anyone who is glad to be with them. And that is one of the things I want to mention is Freud was wrong. We're driven by joy, not sex. And we'll explain that a little bit more in a bit. But joy means that someone is glad to be with me. Someone is glad to be with me. That's how I want to define joy today. Oh, that's better with the microphone. Because when we are stressed, we generally, the first thing that goes is our joy. When you're stressed, we say your relational circuits go off. You are just interested in removing the stress. That the people that are important to you are no longer people. When you're stressed, the person becomes either a resource to help you get what you want, or an obstacle who's in your way to getting what you want. And just to think about what happens if you're driving to work and all of a sudden you're in traffic. Right? The person in front of you is no longer a person, they're an obstacle in your way to getting where you want to go. And so it is with our other relationships. And so if you notice that your relational circuits are off, you're treating people as obstacles or resources, it's time to check your stress level, because that's what stress does. It starts to focus you on goals and you forget about relationships. But joy is all about relationships. Our culture and a lot of other things, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment, have convinced us that joy is found in a lot of things, including cell phones, video games, cookies and ice cream, movies. But joy is relationships. And I want you to remember that. That's how originally it was intended. I believe that's how God designed it. And that is how we can get it back. So I want to give you an interesting definition of maturity. I used to think it was about gray hair or how old you are, or if some of you go to church, maybe how often you go, how many Bible verses you've memorized. But now I like this definition, that maturity is how quickly can you get yourself back to joy when you've lost it. How quickly can you get yourself back to joy when you've lost it? And these are the 6 major emotions: anger, disgust, sadness, fear, shame, and hopeless despair. And we can pretty much identify, I will tell you a story, a getting back to joy story. One of the ways to cultivate joy or to help your resiliency is to tell getting back to joy stories. Because as you tell them, you start to program, or in some cases reprogram your brain to help yourself get back to joy the next time. So I'll tell you a disgust story, for instance, because many nurses deal with that. I was invited to go visit a hospice in Mexico. I live in San Diego. I'm invited to go. I went down, and they had recently built this new structure, and the woman was taking me on sort of a VIP tour as a physician to look at the hospice, and it was beautifully tiled with Mexican tiles, and we got to the kitchen, and I noticed there was a really strong odor in the kitchen. And she started showing me around the pantry and everything, and then I just noticed this odor, and I said, I think it's coming from the refrigerator. And sure enough, so she walked over to the refrigerator and she opened it, and there was some meat sitting in there and its natural juices. The refrigerator had been turned off for several weeks. And the smell came out of there, and my eyes started to water, and I thought I was going to gag, and I had to leave the room. And so I'm sitting there, and she was very embarrassed because she's on taking me on a VIP tour on her new structure, and I, sort of wanted to get out of there. But then and she was apologizing and said, oh, let's go, I'll clean that up later. And had I been alone and found that, I probably would have left. But because something sort of indicated to me that this was an opportunity for growth, and that if I didn't want to clean that up alone, I don't think she would want to clean that up alone. I said, no, let's clean it up now. It'd be better if we both did it together. She said, oh, no, no, no. You know, you're a doctor, you don't need to clean that up. And I said, look, let's just take care of it. It'll be faster. And so we got a garbage bag, we found some Lysol, and together we got this thing cleaned up and, you know, thrown away and opened the doors and, you know, let them air out. And I felt that had I left earlier, I would have sort of been embarrassed, she would have been embarrassed, it would have been a very negative situation, negative way to end a very special time for her celebrating this you know, opening of the new hospice. But instead, I was able to also accomplish one of my goals, which is to be more like Jesus. And so that allowed me to grow, and most of you know men don't particularly always like to clean up messes, and so it allowed me to grow and get back to joy. And not only get back to joy, it also had a bonding experience with this woman who is now going to be taking care of the place, and she felt honored and helped. And so there was relationships involved and allowed me to get back to joy after a very disgusting situation that probably would have sort of set the tone for the rest of the day. And I'm sure you could all tell stories like that, but and as I tell that story, I remind myself, oh, I affirm myself. I was successful in doing that. I'm not always successful. And if you're not successful when you tell your story, it's just important to say, you know, I wish I would have cleaned that up right then. Or I wish I would have said I was sorry then. Because what you're doing, you see, you're reprogramming your brain. The brain is infinitely reprogrammable. It's very plastic. It has neuroplasticity. And so, but to do it, it has ruts. And ruts mean that's the way I've always acted. And for us who are over 30, if you've got 30 years of history doing it this way, it's unlikely that you can change very easily. But as you start telling yourself the story, or you'll hear stories from other people, that's also, oh, well, you know, he did it that way. I wonder if I could do it that way. It is helpful. So telling stories, and it is stories also with appropriate emotion, with things that engage you. Some of you, when I described that, could actually imagine being there. You could sort of, that smell was powerful for you. So I engaged your emotion, and then I told you how I resolved it, and that helps you track, and we can start turning some of those ruts, getting out of the ruts into some new behavior if we tell these stories. Even if we're not successful, we tell it the way we wish it would have gone. So joy does also build resiliency. So here we are. This is, we call these beeps. My friend Ed Corey, who's an addiction counselor. The behaviors, events, experiences, people, and substances that seem to give us joy, but they're actually addictions. Because most of us did not get what we needed in our childhood. We, at one point or another, tend to turn to something that hits the brain in exactly the same area. So it's very confusing to the brain because it seems like joy. But in fact, it is a substitute, and it will not be fulfilling. Because joy is found in relationships, and generally, these things may border on relationships, but oftentimes they can become very selfish. Many of these, the hang gliding, I did that in my residency. The television with the remote control, or the woman up there saying just pure control. I know there are some men, but certainly there are some women who are very controlling. That this is one of the behaviors that happens. That seems to satisfy you, but it's unfulfilling. It's not leading to the kind of fruit that you want. And we've got our ice cream in the corner. That is something that I enjoy. The one in the middle, this is a woman who is singing. She's just in the music ministry in her church. So even something that seemingly could be very beneficial to you, depending how you're using that, what it's costing you and what you're getting, are you really there worshiping God, or is this something about you getting attention because that gives you the dopamine in the brain? Your reward system is about dopamine. This is a chemical response, and you get it when you even think about that activity. When you think about ice cream or chocolate cake or that person or that, whatever your thing is, when a gambler thinks about gambling, they can see on an MRI scan now in the brain, the dopamine area lights up, the pleasure center of the brain. So we've got video games, we've got gambling, money, work, sex, dancing, drugs, grades, alcohol. Some of us are workaholics. Performance is a big problem, I would say, for me. That now it's very socially acceptable. It's not a drug addiction, especially if you're a physician or a nurse. You're so caring. You've always got to go to work. You avoid your relationships at home and go off to work to feel valuable. So work can definitely become a beat. It can become an addiction, something that actually is giving you joy, or seems like it's giving you joy. It's giving you some value, but there's something wrong. And so I want you to be thinking about some of these behaviors because they may seem socially acceptable, but to ask yourself, what is the fruit of that? Is that really bearing the kind of fruit that I want in my life? Suffering well. This is an area of life that is very, very important because we all are going to go through trials, and it's important when we go through to suffer well. I really have appreciated this more the older I get. It has to do with staying relational as we're going through our difficult trials. Staying relational with God, staying relational with others. That when our relational circuits come down, we're suffering, but now we're treating people as objects or resources, or we're going over into addictions. We're eating more ice cream. I remember I had a breakup one time, and I went and bought 6 gallons of ice cream. So, ate ice cream morning, noon, and night. That was how I was dealing with this. I was not suffering well. I was my self-pity party. Therefore, I did what was going to make me feel better. But suffering well is to stay relational, loving, and caring. A lot of that has to do with also your connection with God, because during those difficult times, we feel abandoned oftentimes. We really wanted this. Many of us have prayed about this or did some sort of spiritual maneuver where we wanted to move forward, but we feel like God has blocked us. So we may talk about that also later. Well, how can we build joy? Well, we can firstly smile when we greet people, because a smile actually has a lot of power. They did a study to test the power that a smile has, because we think that we generally smile because we feel good, but a smile actually can work the other way. They took their subjects and they said, what we want you to do, we're doing a divided attention experiment. So what we want you to do is take a pen, and we want you to hold it between your teeth, and we want you to read this material. And so, unbeknownst to them, when they held the pen between their teeth, they were smiling. Clever experiment. They had the other group, and they said, what we want you to do? We want you to read this material, but we want you to hold the pen between your lips. And when they held between their lips, they were not smiling. They inhibited the muscles. And they found that those who held it between their teeth had a much more positive view of the material they were reading. So your brain is registering what is going on in your face. It is not just a byproduct. You can actually use that to help yourself enjoy what's happening right now. You all try it right now. Give yourself a big smile. There you go. You can actually enjoy this talk more if you smile. They actually did the opposite experiment. Somebody else got the idea, and they glued golf tees to the inner eyebrows using like EEG paste. They didn't, super glue them, but they glued golf tees to the eyebrows, and then they told them, we want you to touch the golf tees together. And when they did, they frowned. Didn't know it, right? They frowned, and they read some material. They had another group that said, we don't want you to touch those golf tees together. They found the ones who furrowed their brows, who were frowning, had a negative view, more negative view of what they were reading than the ones without. So what is going on in your face has a lot of power. Do not underestimate that. Sometimes I will, not having a good day, I will just start smiling. I'm using this research to benefit myself, to say, okay, I'm not feeling good. I wonder if I smile or laugh, I can pull myself up a bit. So warm voice tones, singing. The other way I can pull myself out of many things is singing. The brain loves singing. It's synchronized. You've got the words on the left side, you've got the rhythm and melody on the right side. So unlike perhaps quoting a proverb or a scripture verse, if you are singing it, it has a lot more power. Fortunately or unfortunately, many of us are singing songs or have been singing songs in high school or college to justify our behavior. We sing the popular cultural songs, which is basically saying losing people is okay, getting your joy fixed by these beeps or by other unhealthy sources, that's okay. And when we sing those songs, when we sing the popular cultural songs about how to handle stress, how to handle a breakup, how to the anger, money, sex, and power, the stuff that is sung, as we sing that, either we believe it or we use it to justify our behavior. And so I'm very careful what I sing. In fact, I would even say, if you can write songs, the Psalms, King David wrote a lot of Psalms, and some of them are laments, but oftentimes you can write your own song or psalm about who you want to be, or about the specific situation going on in your life, and how you want to see yourself and God in that situation. And I do that, and I found it very powerful. It has the power actually, when I'm going through a difficult trial, a few weeks later, they seem to come on and on, I can sing that song, and that can pull me up. A gratitude list, we'll talk about that in a moment, being joyful before falling asleep, and then helping people around us become joyful, and using touch when appropriate. Now I want to just pause right now, and I want to do an exercise, a joy-building exercise, and it's also a connecting with God exercise. So we're going to take a minute or so, and I want you to do what's called an appreciation moment with God. And I do this sometimes when I am feeling very alone, I'm feeling sort of abandoned, I'm feeling stressed. If I can quiet myself and do an appreciation moment, oftentimes I can connect to God and I can get my joy back. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of a time when you were really joyful. It might have been a relationship you were in, it might have been had a vacation at the beach, whatever that is, a baby was born, some time when you remember being very, very joyful. And I want you just to close your eyes right now and to revisit that place and to feel what you felt and smell what you smelled, and connect with God in that place, because whether or not you realize it, He was there with you. And to be able to recognize and even ask the question, God, do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you understand me? I'm just going to give you a minute right now to just, and some of you actually have what's called an interactive moment where you remember, you really felt God was with you, and you can go to that place. But I want you to cultivate and nurture that memory, because memories are very, very important to the brain as far as getting back to joy. So I'm going to give you a moment of about a minute of silence, just an appreciation memory or an interactive memory. Also ask the question, are you glad to be with me? The Joy means someone's glad to be with you, and God is always glad to be with you. And if you're not feeling that, get into that appreciation that way. Ask him, are you glad to be with me? Some of you may want to start a gratitude list. I want to take another minute and just make a gratitude list. Some of the things that you are thankful for this morning. Some of you can say the memories if you'd like up to you. I used to start every day thinking about all of my problems, and then I've got into this habit of writing all the things I'm thankful for the first thing in the morning. To start off on the right foot. To start off in an atmosphere and attitude of appreciation. Appreciation helps healing, it helps creativity, it helps all kinds of things. And before falling asleep, that's another thing that instead of thinking about your problems or what you just saw on the TV news, I really recommend trying to make it a habit. It takes a while to change habits, but to put a pad by your bed and write the things that you're thankful for, and really spend some time in gratitude, because we all have things that are not going well for us, that we think could be going better, either in our lives or the lives of people we love. And most of us spend the day in our free time focusing on how to change those things to make them better. But if we can spend some time in gratitude and thanksgiving, there's Psalm 100 that says we enter his gates with thanksgiving and enter his courts with praise. And so there's something about if you're having trouble connecting with God, it's telling us, start with thanksgiving. Start giving thanks. There are times, honestly, when I am so down and so depressed that I can't think of anything to give thanks for. There's nothing that I can't remember a prayer God has ever answered. Surgery has just gone badly, and I am just so focused on my pain that I can't feel anything. I don't feel there's no thanksgiving in me. I start with my eyes. I just say, okay, I can see. I know there are people that can't. I just have to get down to some basics and start making myself thankful. Oh, and I can hear, and that means I can hear music, and I can walk, and I know people that can't. So you just start where you are, and you work from there, and you generate and cultivate this, because we want to be thankful people, and getting into that attitude of appreciation really helps. So creating appreciation allows joy. It actually sort of resets the body and the brain. So appreciation also in your relationships. Many times we know people well and we take them for granted. And we have stopped showing appreciation for the people around us. You may show appreciation to your patients, but not necessarily to the significant people in your life. And so I just encourage you to do both of those things. One of the things I try to do with each patient is to bless them. I oftentimes will ask if they want prayer. Some of them do, some of them don't. But I'm sure to bless everyone. I'm sure to pick out what is unique about each specific patient. Everyone has something unique about them. Some of us have sort of hidden that pretty deeply. So they've done a lot to destroy the image that God has imprinted on them by their habits. However, anyone can find dirt. It takes a specialist to find the gold in the dirt. And sometimes I will actually whisper a prayer with someone in my office. God, I'm not seeing anything about this person to bless them with. Would you help me? I don't see it. Maybe I'm not having a particularly good day, and so I'm not very sensitive to the beauty of the person. But you can always, pick up something about them, or the way, I would say, wow, the way you are handling your illness, I'm proud of you. I'm happy that you came back to see me. Whatever it is, find something about the person. I appreciate your eyes, or I like your smile, or you seem really resilient today. Commenting something about them. So building joy, giving surprises that make your eyes light up, and that's I mentioned about the mother and the child, how this joy builds back and forth. Don't underestimate the power of looking people in the eyes. That is a powerful thing. And we'll talk a little bit later about empathy, and the number one thing about empathizing with someone, especially a patient, is that you've looked them in the eyes. And one of the things that I've learned from this research is to even notice the color of their eyes. If you can make a mental note of their eye color, you have looked them in the eyes. And then you've really looked them in the eyes. So looking people in the eyes. So smells can build joy: food, touch, temperature, dogs, babies, old people, and giving joy to others. Well, I don't want to gloss too quickly over this food, because food it can give you joy, but we just talked about food can also potentially be dangerous because it can substitute for your joy. They did a very interesting study, and I'm sure that willpower is something that's important to all of us, that we want to have self-control. Well, around food, it's difficult for many of us. They did a study to see how people's choices are affected by what's on their mind. So they had a group of students, and they told them they had a two-digit number they wanted them to remember. They needed to walk to the other room and write the number on a piece of paper. On the way to the other room, they had a snack cart set out for them. One with chocolate cake and one with fruit salad. And the ones who they told to remember the two-digit number, most of them chose the fruit salad. It was not taxing their memory. The other group, they gave a 7-digit number, like a telephone number. Most of them chose the chocolate cake. And it illustrates that the psychological word is your processing resources. If you've taken them up with a stressful situation or trying to do something else, you have just lowered your self-control. You just lowered your decision-making power. You think you're making a decision of your own free will, but you need to guess again. This is a fact not lost on the marketing and shopping industry. And you'll notice as Christmas season is coming, more displays, more lights, more music, everything they can do to reduce your processing resources, every distraction, scientifically proven you will walk out of the store with things that are not on your list. The more they can distract you, so just notice it. It's actually fascinating when you start to realize what is really going on. And these cell phones, all the distractions, all the billboards as you drive around, you are reducing your processing resources. Some of us actually enjoy that because it means we get the chocolate cake every time. It's not working for us, but it sort of seems easier that way. But there's something about, it's this constant dopamine stimulation. Our brains love novelty. So when you've got a flashing light, or someone waving, or a saleswoman who's feeding you samples, I mean, all of this is very stimulating, and it's decreasing your processing resources to make good decisions for you, for your family, actually for your long term. daily. You have long-term goals. That is to be healthy, to be able to enjoy your relationships and your family. And that chocolate cake may not be good for your long-term goals, but what distractions do is make you think about your short-term goals, feeling better right now. And so they did another study, which was fascinating. They took students, again, most of this are done with students because they're in psychology departments. They brought them into a laboratory where they had just been baking chocolate chip cookies. They pulled the cookies out, they set them on the table, and they had also a bowl of radishes next to them. And they said it was a taste test experiment. They wanted to get some idea of what their tastes were like. So the group in the radish tasting had to sit with these freshly baked cookies next to them for 5 minutes while they ate 3 radishes. The other group got to eat the cookies. They left and they found that immediately after they did other tests of self-control, and they found the ones who were having to resist the cookies, they would smell them, they would even kind of look at them and touch them, but no one ate them. But just the fact that you're resisting cost them significantly on the next test of self-control that they tried, the next puzzle they tried to solve. They were much, much worse than the other group. So the problem is that you don't know when your self-control is dropping. Their mood didn't change. They didn't feel tired. They proved that they had decreased their self-control. So if there's a tray of donuts at work, and you know what happens at the nurses' stations, the doctors know exactly where those cookies come out at Christmas time. And you may walk by that the first time of the day, but by the afternoon, and by your third trip by that, you've started decreasing your self-control. You're more likely to take one in the afternoon. So the more you know about how your brain works and what's going on, the more you can resist, because those Christmas cookies likely are not consistent with your long-term goals. They may help you with your short-term ones, but that's what we want to do. That's what I believe the spiritual life is about, is keeping our long-term goals in focus. And distractions and stress and fatigue will all hurt your short-term goals, or focus you on short-term. So the study gets more interesting. They told the group, both of these groups, that they had a new dating service in town, and they would wonder if they would be willing to see how their services, just kind of check out their services and see if that was okay. And I said, well, sure. And so they led them into a room, and they had them list their top 5 qualities, top 5 interests. They took a photo of them. They put it on a sheet. They walked to another room, and they came back with a sheet from someone else, and they matched 3 out of 5 of their interests. It was a Confederate. It was an actor. And then they said, we're going to give you a 10-minute internet chat session with this person, and just to see how their methods work. The people that had to resist the chocolate chip cookies, 79% of them gave their phone number to a stranger. These are people in exclusive relationships. These are people who self-reportedly said, I am in an exclusive relationship with someone else. They gave their phone number to a stranger. 75% actually made a date with the guy, or the girl, depending. So, just letting you know, and it was only 30% for the ones who ate the cookies. So, I hate to ask you what the moral of that story is. Eat the cookie. It may seem like the answer would be, don't ever pass up the cookie. But that is actually not the truth. It is know when your resources are being depleted. Now, if you are about to go home with someone that you shouldn't, I would say that's an emergency, eat the cookie. Otherwise, understand your resources are being depleted. You probably don't want to be making those kind of decisions, but you can understand as people in stressful jobs, things that they normally wouldn't do start to look good to them. So we don't have to go on there. There are enough scandals out there for you to connect the dots on that. But instead of saying, oh, well, that's those other people, that's the church pastors or the politicians who are in trouble. No, it's us, folks. It's us. It's us our relationships, our flirting, whatever it is, you need to be aware when you're getting depleted and you're looking for joy from sources that you shouldn't necessarily be getting it from. So I want to talk about signs of overwhelm, because whether we're joyful or telling people information, it's important to understand when someone is becoming overwhelmed. And many times because I have a duty to give people information, I haven't noticed these signs of overwhelm. And it can be as simple as someone diverting their gaze. Silence. And this is, I think, very, very important in people who are wanting to introduce spirituality into a patient's healthcare situation. We have to be, many have come from backgrounds where you get some sort of credit for telling someone about Jesus or the gospel or sharing something with them. And so you feel better when you dump the whole truck. And people, if they are becoming overwhelmed, that's when you're going to offend people. That's when we get into trouble, and that's what hospitals are worried about, that if they allow people to pray with patients, that they're going to actually have problems with this because we don't recognize when people are overwhelmed. This also goes for our relationships. If you're talking with, I can tell you, if you're talking with a man and he suddenly is sort of backing up or becoming silent or not meeting your eyes, there's a good chance he's overwhelmed. And you think if you keep talking, if you just got to get this out and he's going to get it, he's already lost you. So there are other ways you have to sort of cultivate, asking him questions. Do you understand this? It could be a tone of voice issue. It can be a number of things that you can use. Other ways, if someone thinks you're not pleased with me and they've had some bad experiences in childhood or rejection, or they have a dismissive attachment style, they are not going to hear you. So overwhelm, recognizing signs of overwhelm, very important in your work relationships and your home relationships. Even with children, oftentimes if they're overwhelmed, they can't hear you. So glassy eye, even laughter. I think laughter is the most misunderstood thing. People will kind of laugh and you just keep talking, you don't understand that. That is also a sign of overwhelm. So be aware also of your own overwhelm, because you'll notice that people will keep talking even if you're overwhelmed and it's not comfortable. So the opposite side of joy is quiet. The opposite of joy is quiet. We love joy. We love the dopamine chemical in our brain that gives us this buzz. You get up in the morning and you got a text message or an email or a telephone call or there's a television show you like to watch. There's your coffee in the morning. Something gives you this little dopamine buzz that you enjoy. Well, the brain needs a rest. It needs quiet. And the inability to quiet oneself is most highly associated with mental illness. So I believe that God instituted the Sabbath to help us quiet ourselves, because he knows the brain has to reset these chemicals, these neurochemicals. Because dopamine all the time actually will just wear you out, will make you depressed. So you need serotonin. When you quiet, you actually get serotonin, and most of us know what antidepressants are. They are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So they raise your serotonin level. You get serotonin when you quiet. And so quieting in relationship, to be able to be quiet with someone and not have to be talking, that helps your serotonin. Having a quiet time with God. Now the problem for most of us, because we're so dopamine oriented with these phones going off all the time, when you sit to have a spiritual time with God in the morning, sometimes it's sort of depressing. I got to go check my email. You'll sit for a few minutes. Especially if your Bible happens to be on your iPad or iPod or whatever it is, you're in more trouble because you're so much closer to it. But to be able to cultivate this quiet, I think it's one of the problems with children today. We set them in front of the television, which is a constant dopamine source. They they don't get to quiet, and so they have an inability to quiet, probably has something to do with the ADD, ADHD problem that we have, because we're not teaching kids how to quiet. We're almost at 45 minutes. I'm going to see if there are any questions right now, and then we can probably pick up after the break and talk about some of this. Is there any questions about what we've been talking about? Yeah.
I just wonder if you could say a little bit about what people can do to cultivate the ability to be quiet.
Sure. Sure. So what people can do to cultivate the ability to be quiet? Well, for me, I'll just tell you what works for me. I take a Sabbath, which is a 24-hour period of time. It's not necessarily on a specific day. It depends when I'm speaking, or where I'm traveling, or when I'm working, when I'm on call. I really try. I have to plan it a week or so in advance, because it won't just show up for you. You don't just have a day off. You have to schedule it. And I will try to certainly not check my email, but I've also been trying to shut off my phone. And that sort of makes me twitch, honestly, every week. It is a very, very difficult thing to do, to stop your input. But I believe that God instituted the Sabbath because we have to stop when there are still things to be done. We have to stop when there are still things to be done. And that bothers us. And it comes back to the foundational question, who's really helping you? Who's really in charge? Who's really responsible? Who's on your side? Do you really believe this? So there's a tremendous amount of faith involved in taking a Sabbath. Make no mistake. To say no, I'm not going to do that, takes much more faith than saying yes. Oh yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll work on that committee. Yeah, I'll come in extra on Sunday. Whatever. To say no is a tremendous step of courage and faith. To take a Sabbath takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of faith. And it took a lot of faith back then when it was instituted, but it was a serious enough that, the Old Testament has someone being stoned for working on the Sabbath. I believe that Jesus changed some of that, so the Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath, so we don't get too legalistic about it. But honestly, for myself, if I'm not sort of legalistic about it, it's not going to happen. It doesn't just, nobody says, you just take the day off. We're going to take care of everything for you today. With your kids, with your family, with your job. You have to make it happen. Retreats are another thing that I use to get away. Also, nobody's going to plan those for you. You need to be able to plan a retreat or your own personal, because this is for you, and it's also, again, good for your long-term goals. And the questions that we want to ask ourselves is, who do I want to be in 10 years? Who do I want to be in 10 years? This research says that you treat your future self like you treat a stranger. You treat your future self like you treat a stranger, because every French fry you eat, 10 years from now, you're going to be trying to work that off or paying for it. Every bad movie you watch, everything you do that's probably shouldn't be done right now, your future self is going to be paying for that. But honestly, we don't care. So yeah, I'm going to be so much wiser and smarter then. It'll be different. And so there's an exercise that people are doing, saying, we can even do it today to say, I want to actually take my future self seriously. That is a real person who's going to have real struggles, perhaps even some more health issues than I have today. I don't want to burden that person with this extra piece of chocolate cake or other cigarette or whatever the thing is. We always think, well, it's just a cigarette now. What about your future self who's going to be paying for that, or that drink, or that whatever it is, that show, that some of the television shows. Honestly, is that really healthy for your future self? The things that are coming in. Mostly even the sitcoms, the things that we're laughing at. It is sexual humor. It is voyeurism. It's things that are not healthy for us. And I don't believe that they're really honoring to God. And then we wonder why we are having trouble connecting with God. And I use this example. If I came to your house in your culture, and many Asians have a culture that you take off your shoes when you come in. Well, I may think that that's silly, and so I don't take my shoes off when I come into your house. And well, that's a silly custom. Your neighbors don't have that, so I shouldn't have to take off my shoes. But if that's your custom, even if I don't know why, if it's important to you, it needs to be important to me. And God has rules and regulations and guidelines that some of us now in our culture don't understand why those are important. But if it's important to you, if I come into your house wearing my shoes and your custom is to take them off, the chances that I'm going to have a very close relationship with you are small. Just because I don't understand why you have that custom. And so when we talk about what we allow into our homes, what we fill our minds with, what we call sort of vegging out in front of the television, we're watching things that are not helping our future self or our families, that's going to stop our connection with God. But getting time, Sabbath, even if you can take 2 hours or 4 hours to spend some time, even walking outside. Some of us cannot sit with your Bible or with your notebook or something and have a quiet time. That is something that in our culture you have just your brain wiring. But that's okay. If you can walk and pray, then you can walk and pray. Getting outside in nature is actually very, very healthy for serotonin, for developing this quieting. And being able and exercise is also excellent for the brain. The best thing in all of the journals and all of the articles that you can do for your brain and for your self-control is exercise. It's not necessarily memorizing scripture or any of those things. If you can do that while you're exercising, that's even better. But something about exercise, because when you show self-control in one area, it overflows into the other areas of your life. They showed that when they got the students to exercise, they became more punctual. They spent more time studying instead of watching TV. They treated people better. They ate healthier. They didn't tell them to do any of these things. They just reported this was happening. They stopped smoking and drinking as much. Everything, this was within 2 months. In the first month, they only exercised once a week. And by the second month, they averaged 3 times a week. So exercise, very, very important. And obviously, studying the Bible or your Bible studies, memorizing scripture is important in how your mind thinks about things. But if you're not taking care of your temple, of your body, and I think for many of us, there's a disconnect. It becomes all spiritual, and you forget, your body is spiritual, and that to exercise that, even 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes a day, honestly, shows a difference. Doesn't have to be an hour, and it's not about, the longer you go, the better. You need to choose something that you will do. Because if you're not going to do it, saying I'm going to go to the gym every day is ridiculous. But to pick 5 minutes at your lunch hour and taking a break, that is, walking outside for 5 minutes, that is going to help a lot of things. Well, that's a long answer to your question. Let's take a break right now. So it sounds like I want to get some people to the bathroom. We'll pick up here in 15 minutes. Okay, we're going to get started again. I want to start off. I was asked to tell my story. I get caught up in the science. You can tell I love talking about science, but sometimes it's interesting to know my background, where I come from, and how did I get here? What is a neurosurgeon doing talking about joy? That's a strange situation. My father was born in a traditional Jewish family in Europe before World War II, just before the war broke out. He and his mother and his brother escaped and came to the United States, ended up settling in California, moving in a house with 16 other relatives. So he was sort of a refugee situation. When he was 20, he came over when he was 17. When he was 20, somebody put a copy of the New Testament in his hands. And his last name was Levy. It started with L, so he began reading the book of Luke. got to chapter 4, and it said that it referenced the Old Testament, the Isaiah passage, where Jesus said that he came to bind up the brokenhearted and to set the captives free. Well, my father felt like, I've got a broken heart, and I'm not feeling free. I wonder what this man is talking about. So he began to pursue Jesus and ultimately became a Messianic Jew, a follower of Jesus. He married my mother, who was not Jewish, and I grew up going to church. I didn't like church, and so as soon as I could stop going, I stopped. I was a gifted child. I didn't feel that I needed a lot of that help. It was nice. I wouldn't turn down a blessing, but I wasn't so sure that I needed it because I was so gifted. I went to medical school, and I found that people are young and they're beautiful and they're intelligent, and generally everyone is healthy, and you can never imagine that any problems would happen to you. And so God is something that is really very low on the priority list of most campuses, universities, and medical schools. It's just not something that is really a popular topic with students. There are always a few, but the ones that I was around, especially those going into neurosurgery, God wasn't really big on their radar screen. What we discovered about the brain is that you get to choose what you want to believe, and your brain makes it true for you. You get to choose. It's not a logic. It's not. You think it's all about logic, but you're choosing because you know what's true, or you've figured this out. But your brain actually makes the decision for you. You get to choose, and it usually has to do with maximum pleasure, minimum pain. It has to do usually with your social circle or your family or whoever, because believing something that they don't believe would cause some pain. So you are going along with that, and you'll justify whatever it is, generally, maximum pleasure, minimum pain. And while I was in medical school, Jesus, who I had learned about in Sunday school, I thought was sort of a weak character. It wasn't someone that I was really interested in following, because I wanted to be a neurosurgeon, sort of a go-getter, and he didn't seem like someone that was that powerful. Again, I sort of painted that picture of what I wanted to believe. It was very convenient for me to believe that. I got out into practice. I was doing endovascular surgery, which is surgery through the blood vessels going up into the brain, as well as open brain surgery. And I did a very complex case. It was a woman with a giant aneurysm. She was in her 50s. It took 11 hours. I had sutured the superficial temporal artery, which if you feel right in front of your ear, you feel a little pulse, a little tiny pulse right there. I opened the window in her skull and sewed it into not the blood vessels on the surface of the brain, but actually all the way down at the brain stem level. Very complex operation. Probably only a few people in the country could do that operation. My professor was one that had taught me to do it, so I wanted to prove that my technical skills were as good as anyone in the world. So the surgery was successful. It took 11 hours. I was very pleased. I was on top of the world. 2 days later, she died of a blood clot, and I was devastated. I spent all this time doing this perfect technical surgery, suturing, two vessels together in a T formation, with thread that you can't even see except under a microscope. And I ended up, the lady was dead. So at the same time, I had a relationship that wasn't going particularly well, mostly because I wasn't treating her particularly well. And who would know that eventually, some people will just decide they've had enough. And she chose to find another surgeon to go out with. And I was mortified because I said, well, he's not as talented as I am. But he actually treated her better. So I had some things to learn. But because this was happening, I was angry. My life wasn't working. I should have been on top of the world. I'm a 30-year-old neurosurgeon, one of the youngest that's out, and my life seems to be not working the way I wanted it. And so I was angry, and when you get angry, you blame people, and I blame my father. But, well, it's his fault. He didn't teach me how to be a man or have a relationship with a woman, didn't treat my mom particularly well. So this is what I learned, and so it was his fault. And I was angry with him, wrote him some angry letters. He never wrote back, which made me only angrier. Finally, I called my mom and said, look, I'm very upset, all these things I missed in my childhood. Dad said I would be happy if I was a neurosurgeon, that this is what would make you happy. We say we're snatching people from the jaws of death, which is sort of a God-like way to talk about our specialty. And yet I'm still not happy. And she said, David, you need to forgive your father because you have hurt people and you need to be forgiven. Well, that wasn't why I called her. I was looking for a little sympathy, and all of a sudden, I think, wait a minute, he should be apologizing to me. What's this about forgiveness? But that part about me hurting people, now that was true because the situation with this woman, I had not treated her very well, and so I knew I had hurt people. And so I began, at that point, I hung up the phone. I was just in the privacy of my room, and I said, okay, God, I forgive my father. But there are some things that I missed. I need to be reparented. I need something here. And I also need forgiveness. And so I have hurt people, and I need to be forgiven. So I moved toward that. And because of my background, the person of Jesus suddenly became more interesting to me because of the way that we get forgiveness. Because I'd like to say, in fact, a lot of surgeons like to say, well, we need to be able to forgive ourselves. And I understand what we're saying, but there's a point where I don't know that I have the authority to forgive myself for things I do that hurt other people. Once I receive forgiveness from God, I think then I have to forgive myself because my standard can't be higher than God's standard. But for me to be able to sort of self-forgive, I'm not sure that may be going beyond my ability. But nonetheless, it was after that I didn't have to be famous anymore. I didn't have to be a star. I didn't have to sort of prove that I was someone. It sort of unhooked some of that drive for me. But also I had this spiritual interest that was awakened because I wanted to know more about Jesus. I began to read actually the Bible, the story of his life. Whereas I had heard stories, now I was reading it for myself and seeing, I had thought of Jesus as someone who was sort of weak and then they killed him and never really fought back. And then I saw the way that he handled people, the courage that he had and the kindness that he had. And I said, I want to be like that. And that was really starting my journey. It was years before I would even, go back to church because some of it was I had the reputation in the community as a Jewish doctor, and so the Christianity and Jesus and all of the mixture. I'm not sure if some of you are from some mixed backgrounds, but for me it was always about what people would think of me. That I have a lot of fear of what people think, and I think that is very common in our society. And so worried that if people didn't like me, things wouldn't go well for me. And so it was important for me to always make sure that people liked me. And so when we're talking about spiritual issues, I didn't want to be politically incorrect. I wanted to sort of do what I was supposed to be doing, what people thought I should do. And so I began having more and more courage. I actually did go back to church. And then one day, I decided I wanted to pray for people, but that's something that I should probably do. I went into the preoperative area, just my heart was pounding as far as when am I going to, ask somebody to pray. Ultimately, I did ask a woman to pray, and she wanted to pray, and after I said a prayer for her, she started to cry. And I realized that people are really scared before their surgery, and that when we ask them if they'd like a prayer, that is that's something really kind. That's who I wanted to be. And it took a risk because of being misunderstood, that I was pushing my faith on someone else. Or what if someone, thought I was asking them to pray because I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't had a good night's sleep and needed a lot of help. So I always worried about being misunderstood. And so ultimately then started virtually asking everyone if they wanted to pray before their surgery, and found that most everyone said yes. Oftentimes I will say, would you like me to pray privately on my own, or would you like us to pray together now? Because I never want them to feel that I'm using my authority, my position, to coerce them into doing something they don't want to do, because they want my services. We sort of say, well, okay, like we do at the car dealership, or I'll take that package. You just try to just please people. When you need someone's services, you're trying to keep them happy. I never want to do that. So I try to be very sensitive, and then if someone obviously doesn't want prayer, then I just move right along. I don't even ask them why not. I just say, that's fine. Look, I treat everyone as if they were a member of my family. I'm going to take great care of you. We're going to do the best that we can. So that was about 7 to 10 years ago now. And I wrote the book when more of those stories began happening. And I can answer some more questions about that. But that's sort of my journey to bring you up to today, realizing that also that spirituality has the power to change you. I can say that who I was before as a neurosurgeon, I went into medicine, I thought initially to do good for people. But because of the demands and the all nights, and somehow you develop this, wow, I'm suffering like this, so I must be really special. And if I'm really special, that must mean that I can treat people poorly, or that people, somehow that I need to be rewarded, actually. The psychological term is called moral licensing. And we do that actually with our diets too. Well, I've worked out on the treadmill, so now I can have a sundae. It's called moral licensing. You do something good, and so you can now treat people maybe not so nicely. Well, I had, honestly, problems with people who were smoking, who were overweight. I liked you as a patient if you had a very complex aneurysm that I could publish or make me look good, or something I could show my colleagues at a meeting. I would show something that would say, well, you're there actually to make me look good. That's unfortunately how a lot of physicians see life, because as we come through the training, it's such a sacrifice that and I'm realizing, look, I want to get what I want, which is to be in the top rung of neurosurgery. I have to have a certain number of very interesting cases that no one else has done, and you could see that I was, collecting those, and I had the technical gifts, and I wanted to keep proving that. Well, as I began this journey, this spiritual journey, I also, the more I felt that I was reading and becoming like Jesus, sort of naturally, when I saw someone who was overweight, I never thought, wow, this is just a lot of work for me, because surgery is always much more difficult. It was, I wonder if someone's hurt this person. I wonder if they're building up that buffer to keep people away. I wonder if they've been wounded in their childhood. I wonder if they'll let me help them with that. It was those kinds of things that allowed me to just sort of get in touch with people need more than surgery and pills. That the spiritual care, even it's not about them believing the way I believe. It's where are you on your spiritual journey, and can I help you? Where do you want to go, and can I help you move closer to God? It is not about trying to get people or forcing them to believe like I do. I really do want the best for each person, where they are on their journey. I'll fast forward here a bit and talk about returning to joy. I was telling you that telling stories is good for you and for the people listening. So I'll start out with a story, I'll tell you another one. And this may incorporate a couple of these emotions. It was some years ago, I had a friend who came to me and he said, he was a surfer in San Diego. He said, dude, that's the way surfers talk, dude, you got to meet my cousin. She's really cute, and you got to meet her. And I was single, and I said, fine. Where is she? Well, she's in Chicago. In Chicago? I said, I don't want to go to Chicago. He said, well, her father is pretty famous. He's this guy. I said, oh, well, Chicago's not that far. So I had a little business connection. I was able to had some consulting work, went to Chicago, met Renee. Sure enough, she was cute, and I flew back there a time or two, probably the third time or so. I just noticed, when I met her in the airport, I wasn't that excited about her. I couldn't figure out what was going on or why not, but just not that excited. And so I came back to San Diego, and well, when you're single, you need some advice. You find a married person to ask. If they know things, they have these secret codes and things secret handshakes. That you know when you're married that single people don't know. I said, look, I'm having this problem. There's this girl, and everything, looks good, but somehow I'm not feeling right about this. And he said, oh, you young people, you're all the same. Your problem, you never make commitments to anything. And so the problem anyway, the feelings go away in 6 months. Feelings, who needs the feelings? So you just need to make a commitment to someone. I said, I'm a scientist, so I said, well, now that, actually, I've never made a commitment to anyone, so, I've never tried that. So I went back to Chicago and asked her to marry me. As a scientific experiment. So, and it seemed to work for a time. I was such a hero for this family. It was for the knight in shining armor. It comes as she sold her car, she quit her job. She was moving to San Diego. She had a big bridal shower and all of this, and I'm sort of, wide-eyed thinking, well, this, who knew it would be this exciting? So I picked her up at the airport, and I just remember seeing her walking down, and I'm thinking, I hope that's not her. Sure enough, it was her. By the time she got to the airport in San Diego, I had no feelings. There was just something that was not there. Well, I should have mentioned I did one other thing that some of you may do. When you're in a real quandary, you don't know what to do. You ask advice from people who all say, oh yeah, this is good for you, it's time for you to get married, this is the one. And then I did something called Bible roulette. I don't know if you've ever played that. You look through the Bible, put your finger down, try to find a verse that will give you some insight. And I hit the Proverbs one that said, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and receives a blessing from the Lord. So I don't want to turn down a blessing from the Lord, so this is obviously what's happening here. So I'm good. This is the way it is. This is my lot in life. And so I'm trying to make this work, and we're sort of in counseling, and we're trying to, the months go by, and I'm unable to eat Mexican food. My digestion, something's really going. I'm starting to feel like I've got this mass in my stomach. And being a surgeon, I knew it was a tumor. I knew it was a stomach tumor that I had. And so I went to, when you're in the system, you just go to the GI specialist, and I said, no, I need to have a scope. So sure enough, I had them do an endoscopy, and what do you know, there was no tumor. And he said, is there any stress in your life? And I said, no, I don't think there's And I got back to the house, and And she drove me back there, and then I realized, I wonder if it has something to do with this relationship that I'm just not feeling right about as we're moving down the road. And I realized that I was going to have to confront her at some point, or I was going to perish. I could no longer eat anything except some soy milk and some bread. Not a spice, no salt. I mean, my stomach wasn't taking anything. And so, returning, and some of this was, and a lot of this was fear, right? I had made a big mess. And it's easy when you've made a big mess it's easier, you think, to just keep going, because confronting this situation now it's gonna be really, really ugly. It's gonna be really painful. And so getting back to joy from fear, and I would also say there was some shame involved in this because I was so heroic when I made this move. And every time I would sort of try to back away, she would start to cry and sort of say things like, oh, you're just like all the other guys or whatever, you're never making a commitment. I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm a neurosurgeon, I'm not like all the other guys. And so I'm sort of, she knew just how to push my buttons and get me moving forward and shame me into behaving how she wanted to keep moving forward with this. Well, I realized that I had lost 10 pounds and I was going to perish unless I actually confronted this situation. So yes, indeed, I did tell her, look, this is not going to work. I'm not going to marry you. It's not going to work for me. And sure enough, she was very angry. She blamed me. Her mother called and said I'd ruined her life, that how could she ever trust someone again, and all of these things. And we actually went through a reconciliation process where we gave and received forgiveness. And I had to ask her forgiveness because I did wrong by her. I asked her to marry me when I wasn't in love with her. I mean, it sounds crazy, but to get back to joy, you've got to do a couple of things. First of all, I believe that, perhaps God was trying to tell me some things and I was not listening. I wanted to be married, and this is the way I was going, so I kept moving forward. So there's some forgiveness I needed to receive from God. There's some forgiveness I needed to receive from her. And she may or may not forgive me, but I need to actually apologize and say, I recognize that I did you a disservice, and that you sold your car, and you quit your job, and you moved out here, and that was wrong of me. I'm sorry. See, cleaning up messes is not fun, it's not easy, but it's the only way out of this. And then there's the third part of that, and that is forgiving yourself. And we talked a minute ago about forgiving yourself, which is a vital step once you've done these other ones. Self-compassion is actually a very large area of research right now because it has a lot of power. We find that people who are not self-compassionate are not very compassionate to other people. And self-compassion means that you essentially give yourself a break, but it has a couple of the first item of self-compassion is called common humanity. You are human, and other people have made that similar mistake. I had to say, you know what, as crazy as this sounds, I bet someone else has done this before me. The second part of that is treating yourself with understanding and kindness. By the way, I know the professionals in this room, most of us are not particularly self-compassionate, we're very self-critical. And so these steps, you may want to write these down, put them on your mirror, and practice them, because each one of us has these areas of life where we've got some shame we did not do. And oftentimes, the reason I'm telling this story is because relational messes are usually the things we beat ourselves up about the most. I should have done such and such in a relationship years ago, but I didn't, and so I'm suffering now, and I'll suffer forever because I made a mistake. Self-compassion is a way, I think the only way, to really unwind that. Common humanity. You are a human, and you made that mistake, and other people have made that mistake before you, and other people are going to make that mistake after you. Do you think Other people have agreed to be married and didn't love the person for whatever reason. It happens all the time. For money, for whatever, for convenience, for pregnancy. It happens all the time. And so I was not unique in that. That's an important step. Number two, treating yourself with the understanding and kindness which you would use to talk to your best friend. So how would you talk to your best friend about this situation? You would say, well, how did you get into this mess? Well, I thought it was time to get married. I asked this married guy. He told me to, feelings go away anyway in 6 months. You might as well just marry her. And by the way, it'll all get better if you make a commitment. Well, I've never tried that. Look, the thing you have to remember is that every decision that you have ever made has been made with what I call your best brain. You were using your best brain at that moment, including your emotional state, your social situation, your physical fatigue, the input you were getting from others, the expectations that were coming in from others. That was all, and your brain chemistry. Maybe you were clinically depressed. Maybe who knows what was happening in your brain chemistry. You were having your period. Whatever is happening, your best brain was used to make that decision. Even if it was to, inject drugs. Every drug addict on the street is using his best brain at that moment. He thinks, this is the best I can do right now to get myself out of this mess. I'm going to inject this. He's using his best brain. Now, 5 minutes later, he may decide that wasn't such a wise situation, but at that moment, and at the moment you made your decision that put you in that situation I made that made such a mess for me, I was using my best brain, including my dreams and hopes and aspirations, my desires, good desires, naive desires, right? Now, all of the naivete, you were using your best brain, so you need to be even doing, in fact, you may even stop here and do a little experiment or do a little exercise with you. I just love to do this instead of filling every moment with my voice. Because you have got your message that you beat yourself up about. And I want you to do a little, it's essentially taking that and saying, okay, if I was talking to my best friend, how would I can see, I was rebounding off this relationship, and that's how come I made that mistake, right? And you start talking to yourself with kindness and understanding and giving yourself some grace, saying you used your best brain at the time. You know more now, but for me to say, oh, I was so stupid and so silly, and it's an interesting story to tell, but I did the best I could at the time, and so did you. And so as to unwind these things, to get back to joy, forgiveness from God, if you haven't asked forgiveness from God, if you've hurt somebody, and whether you intended to or not, I didn't intend to hurt this girl, but I did. And so I needed to ask her forgiveness. And potentially if God gave you some signals that you need to confess, then that's something you also need to do. But then I want to go through, and there may be some things you need to write down about your situation. I want to take a minute or so now for you to start writing down the specific circumstances that were surrounding that. And as you begin to be kind to yourself, as if you were talking to your best friend, saying, I can understand why you did that. Now, we know more now, but I can see why you did that. Talk to yourself that way. And let's just take a minute here to cultivate some self-compassion for the mistakes, some of the larger ones, or the largest one that you have made, specifically if it's a relational mistake. Who you were, your best brain at that time, what was going through your mind. Go back there and be kind to yourself at that moment. Not with what you know now, but who you were when you made the mistake. Let's take a minute to do that. and this is something actually I can spend quite a bit of time doing. These are the things you can do when if you're having trouble having a quiet time or sitting down with a spiritual reflection time for you. I'll sit with a pad of paper and I'll write. You can start with a statement. Well, I shouldn't have done that. And then you flip that statement around saying, at that time I should have done that. And then you seek to prove that that's true. That it makes sense that I should have done it at that time because of the advice I got, where I was, and I hadn't had that experience before. And so you should be able to fill, both sides of a page of paper, proving to yourself that you should have done that at that time, given your best brain. And as you start to have self-compassion, it actually has the effect of making you more compassionate for others and giving you more joy. We think that we have to beat ourselves up, and if you beat yourself up enough, you'll never do it again. And this is a way that we use shame. And I can tell you that the research shows that shame doesn't work. Now, it actually works somewhat. It works a little bit. But in the big things, when it comes down to sort of avoiding temptation again, they did a study that said they put a piece of cheesecake in front of somebody, in front of these people, and said, now I want you to think about how bad you're going to feel if you eat that cheesecake. 90% of them ate the cheesecake. They said, we want you to think about how proud you will feel if you don't eat the cheesecake. And only 60% ate the cheesecake, 40% didn't. In other words, and if they didn't say anything, you just set the cheesecake, 20% of them ate it. So if they shamed themselves, more of them ate it, and they showed they took bigger bites and ate more of the cheesecake than if they didn't tell them any instructions at all. Now, why would that be? Well, it's because when you feel shame, it makes you feel bad. And when you feel bad, you want to feel good. And when we want to feel good, we do what makes us feel good right now. And so this shaming, self-critical nature sets us up to do the very things we don't want to do. I mean, we've got more with men than women, but a huge pornography problem in this country, including religious figures, political figures. This is a big, big problem. And because when we get stressed or when we think of shame, oftentimes we do the very thing we don't want to do. This self-compassion is also a way, and as you make your list and you prove to yourself, it's a form of insight. Insight is why we come to here. You guys came today to hopefully get some insights. Insight means, oh, I can use that in my life to actually make it better. And that's why many of us go to church or our house of worship, because we're hoping that the pastor, priest, rabbi is going to give us some insight. Well, by writing these things, guess what? You're actively going after the insight. You're saying, oh, well, there it is. That's why I did that. Huh. I had never imagined I had a reasonable excuse. Well, if you were your best friend, you'd be looking for the reasonable excuse of why you did that. And so as you start to treat yourself with kindness, guess what? You become a kinder person to others, and you begin to appreciate who you are. In fact, wow, look, none of us mean to make a mistake like I made. And you, whether you're divorced or whatever it is, or you made a mistake with children, these things that haunt you and hurt you. Look, you had a reason for that. You were raised a certain way. There were other people who had input into your life. And as you begin to write those things down, you begin to get insights into who you are, and you become more mindful. That's a big term today. The more mindful we are, the more ammunition we have against temptation, against beating ourselves up, shaming ourselves so that we do the very things, eat the very things we don't want to do and eat. Okay. So she ended up going back to Chicago. Within a week, I was eating burritos. So it really was, and that actually, if any of you are wondering if there's a connection between emotional health and physical health, there it is. And also, if you have psychosomatic things with thinking you have a stomach tumor when it's just a knot in your stomach because you're afraid to do the thing you need to do, and the thing it takes courage to do, but you have not been a person of particular courage. And I see a lot of people who are in difficult relationships, and there is some victimization going on, but some of this is that we haven't had the courage to actually tell the truth because we're afraid of the reaction, just like I was afraid of the reaction. That's the last thing I wanted until I couldn't eat anymore. I didn't want to tell the truth that I had made a mess or that things had to change. And so if we're afraid of someone's anger, and I was very afraid of her anger and her parents' anger, I wanted their respect. And so as we tell truth in our relationships, it stirs things up. It takes courage. And courage is something that, when we talk about faith, and spirituality and faith are very well tied together, I believe that faith really takes three things. It is belief. Many of us have a belief. Based in a knowledge of God. There's some knowledge going on, and it's not just your imagination, it's some knowledge of God. And number three is risk. Belief, knowledge of God, and risk. That is my definition of faith. And so, before I said a prayer for a patient, I had a belief, I had a knowledge of God, but I didn't want to take the risk. So I thought I had faith, but I don't believe that, and it may not take risk in every case, but eventually your faith is going to take some courage. To do the right thing always takes courage. And what I noticed is that people respect people of courage. They may try to shame you or blame you or yell at you or be angry at you, but ultimately they respect people of courage. And so having a community around you may help when you take a risk in an important relationship. But ultimately, for your growth, I believe to fulfill God's design for you, that all of us need to take risks. And probably some of you know, even in your relationships today, there usually are risks that we need to take. People who we need to tell the truth to in love, and it may cost you something. They may not want to have the same kind of relationship with you. It may cost some peace in your house, and all of that needs to be done, I would say, kindly, prayerfully, to be able to move forward, because sometimes we make these knee-jerk reactions, say, oh, I know, I'm going to tell them the truth, and it doesn't mean that you have to tell them today. You have to dump, like I said, the whole truck on them. When we tell people the truth, we're looking for signs of overwhelm. Oftentimes, if you've never told the truth before, you've been very passive in your relationships, and with this woman, with Renee, I was very passive. I was just trying to please her, make sure she was happy, and everything she would say, I would, yes, honey, I would try to be the perfect man, but there was something wrong inside of me. I was doing this for the wrong reason. This wasn't who I was. This wasn't my design. And my body was physically telling me something was wrong, but I wasn't listening. Okay. Let's talk about empathy. Empathy, knowing what another person is feeling what another person is feeling, and responding compassionately to their distress. So empathy is something that we need in our careers and also, obviously, in our relationships. Most everything we're talking about today can be used in both of these. So Helen Reese up at Harvard actually came up with a mnemonic for empathy, and number one is we talked about eye contact. So if you're in your relationships, are you actually looking them in the eyes? Many of us feel very threatened if we look in someone's eyes for very long, more than a few moments. However, one of the Jim Wilder and this Thriving Recovery program, he's a psychologist, and he actually has a therapy where you get with your significant other and you look them in the eyes for 3 minutes. And it is not a stare down contest. You can look away, you don't have to, but it is getting used to looking in the eyes and getting back to that joyful childhood thing where you're building joy with each other by looking in the eyes. But when you have a relational problem, a rift in the relationship, some resentment, that's very, very difficult to do. So it actually sort of pushes you toward resolving those things so you can enjoy looking in the eyes of someone else. Muscles of facial expression. We talked about the smile. I'm not going to go through that again, but the other person is now not smiling. You may need to adopt their facial features if you're going to empathize with them. You don't have to keep that, but initially you're going to want to let them feel understood, because being understood is a huge part of helping people relationally through something. So many people will come and try to give advice, but unless you feel understood, I don't really, most of us want to be heard first. Want someone to understand how I feel. Your patient or your colleague or your an important person in your life wants to feel that you understand them. And so asking questions about that, even body posture. Much of this is written for physicians. We don't sort of stand over people and dominate them or have a stern look on our face. Affect is what the patient's affect. Tone of voice, very important. You notice the patient's tone and you adjust your rhythm and tone. And this actually works for children as well. If a child is even having a tantrum, oftentimes you can come and you can start singing to them at the same level that they're having their tantrum, and then you can sort of gradually bring it down. And oftentimes you can affect their expression. They want someone who is with them. They want to feel understood. So expressing that they're understood, and sometimes you can match their energy level and then bring it down. Hearing, what are you hearing? What might be healing? A head, nodding your head. And then what do you feel? Your response. This is actually very interesting. It has to do with the mirror neurons. We all have mirror neurons in our brain, which actually help us to feel what the other person's feeling. And they have done studies on this. They did this MRI study that I feel your pain is actually a true statement. They had 16 couples. They put the women in the MRI scanner, and they had electrodes hooked to their hand as well as their husband's or significant other's hand. They had a mirror so they would see, and they had a light that went on that told them who was going to get shocked. And they MRI'd their brain when they were going to get shocked. They MRI'd their brain when their husband was going to get shocked. And what they found was that essentially everything but the sensory cortex, where the shock was felt, everything else in the brain seemed about the same. That the emotional impact of that shock on their significant other or their husband felt the same to them as if they had received it. So this is actually a picture of these MRIs. And that's the one that shows this anterior cingulate cortex. You see the green and the red lines are essentially the same. They're feeling it in much the same way, the same area, as if they were feeling their own pain. So if someone's in the room with you, or your patient is, and you're suddenly feeling really anxious and you don't know why, it's probably because they're anxious. If you're feeling really sad do you have a question? Funny, I've been asked that before. They didn't put the men in the scanner. They did it just with the women. So I don't know. I do know that we all have mirror neurons. Probably they went, as any research project is going to go for the highest effect, which would likely be with the woman. So, but men do have that, and if they want to develop it, I think many men probably minimize that because it may not be socially acceptable to sort of feel someone's pain. But I generally notice it. I'm in the office with a person, and I can't figure out why suddenly I'm feeling really sad. And it's not really apparent to me, but there's something, it can be, so much of it is subliminal. It can be their face, their expression, the tone of their voice, but something is making me sad. And so our usual response is, well, I got to get this person out of here. This is not how I want to feel. But it is an indication. You could even say it's your brain helping you with the spiritual. It's what actually is present spiritually in them to help you understand, wow, they must be feeling really sad. I wonder what's happened. I may ask some questions along that line. Blank expressions, when we have no expression on our face, and this actually can be very, very disturbing to people. Especially if they have had a dismissive or a disorganized attachment style, their parent was dismissive to them, that if you walk in with a blank expression and you don't bond with them, you don't appreciate them, you're not empathizing with them, that can set off some real anxiety, especially if they're in a situation where they're feeling out of control, which describes a hospital situation generally. So if someone's feeling out of control and you don't empathize, you sort of have a blank expression, you're into your own stuff, your relational circuits are off, that can really trigger some, it's not just a neutral problem, it actually can be a very negative situation, those with insecure attachment styles. So what we want to do actually is imitate, at least initially, the neural circuit activation is stronger when we imitate it. So you sort of naturally do that, but you may need to work at it a bit with your patients to actually imitate their facial expression. Let's talk a little about an angry patient, because that's one of the things that we often face. I used to really dislike dealing with angry patients, and now my staff knows, they come and say, this, they need you. They need you. Because I actually enjoy this as much as surgery. I enjoy taking someone who's angry and making them understood, making them feel validated. I mean, if you're angry, you're angry for a reason. Somebody's been, putting you off, or you couldn't get an appointment, or you couldn't find a parking space at the hospital, or whatever it was. You had a flat tire, you're late. Look, we all go through that, and when you're a patient, especially if you've got a diagnosis of brain aneurysm and this, you haven't slept in a couple of days, it doesn't take much to make you angry. So to empathize with them, to use a tone of voice, to match their facial expression. I'll do a physical exam on people that I don't need to do a physical exam on. Why? Just so I touch them. Just so I squeeze my fingers. Right? I've held their hand for a moment. Tap them on the shoulder. Okay, sit down. Just to have them touch me, I will do a physical exam. And touch is so important. We are obviously a society that's very concerned about touch, and obviously I have to mention appropriate touch, and as women it's potentially, with male patients, sometimes more difficult for you, but I almost always will grab someone's toes through the blankets of their sheets. I will always grab their feet or touch their hand or something that will communicate to them that you're valuable to me. And the energy really does flow. The energy really, there's no question about it. When you have a positive attitude and you are confident in who you are, and that there's love within you, that it flows out. People may not be receiving it because their relational circuits are off, but it starts something in their brain. They're starting to feel, wow, maybe this is a safe place. At least I'm safe with this person. Because they didn't have to touch me walking by my bed, grabbing my toes. They didn't have to do that. They could have just touched the IV line or just, recorded the vital signs, but they actually touched me. And that, even though you've got to wash your hands afterwards or whatever, these are the things that make spiritual care, I believe, as people are cared for, the immune system is boosted and people generally heal better. Validating them, apologizing, giving an explanation. So affirmation and blessing. Many of us cannot pray for people. It's awkward, or we just don't feel that we want to do that. But I believe that everyone, what I say is nobody is safe from a blessing from me. Nobody's safe from a blessing. You're going to get one if you're my patient, no matter what. I am going to find some way to bless you, to call out what's good in you, to bring it forth, to let you know that you are unique and special, even if your circumstances, your environment is telling you just the opposite because of your disease or your depression or how much you weigh or whatever the negativity has been given you. The people in your life are giving you negativity. I'm going to give it to you positive. I'm going to tell you good things about you because there is hope. And I believe that. You're never without hope. And so when someone sees you, and they say there are no neutral exchanges. You either are adding something to the relationship or you're taking something away. There's generally not a neutral exchange. And so you want to be adding to people. But to do that, you need to be having your quiet times. You need to have your serotonin. You need to feel joyful because you can't pass on what you don't have. You can do some of these empathetic maneuvers it will help you, but generally you will become more and more depleted. You need to be keeping yourself tuned up. This is one of the things I use. We call it a problem sandwich. If you've got to give someone bad news, to find something before and after to help out. And most of us think like, okay, I've got to talk about this problem. And this whole, I got to dump the truck on you. We've got to talk about this serious thing in our relationship or whatever. And this even works with patients. Okay, look, things were going great. I was really enjoying this. And then this happened. And I'm not sure what happened, but instead of saying, you know what, this was your fault, and if you would have kept that last appointment, this wouldn't have happened. Saying, something happened. This really bothered me. It really hurt me. And so vulnerability, as we share some of our vulnerability, it actually draws people in. This hurt me. And I'm wondering what we can do to get back what we had before. I'm wondering if you did this, if that would help get us back on track to where we were before. And obviously, most of us, as far as when we think about our relationships at home, we're thinking, oh, I've got quite a list of things that need to be done to get us back to where I want to be. But probably that's going to lead to overwhelm. And so we want to start with something that we think is something doable. Because, as we mentioned before, even a small bit of self-control, even a small change, they had a group of men who were domestically violent. They were abusers. They were actually beating their girlfriends and wives. And they had them pick one of these three things. Number one, open the door with your non-dominant hand. If you're right-handed, open the door with your left hand. Number two, stop saying yeah. Say yes. And I can't remember number three. There was something sort of similar to that. And you think, well, how would that change? Any effort you make in the area of self-control overflows into other areas. Their domestic abuse decreased by doing one simple thing. So I took this to mean, wow, if I want more self-control, so I started trying to brush my teeth with my left hand. It's clumsy at first, but anything you do for your brain that's stretching it, see, the brain wants the easiest pathway. Part of it does. Your frontal lobes are actually designed to make you do the harder thing. God made your frontal lobes to help you do the harder thing, because the harder thing is going to take some effort, some self-control. That's some work. Well, most of us, once we get through school, we've had about enough of that self-control and discipline. Now we want some chocolate cake and all the rewards and the big pension plan and all of that. But your brain, if you don't continue with the discipline, it will have other problems. And for Alzheimer's patients, they know that the more memory work that they do, and so memorizing proverbs, verses, things that will help you, those are good for your brain. It's not just that's good for you spiritually, it's also good for your brain in general. Your brain actually sort of rallies around it. Hey, we're moving here. The brain is plastic. You can train yourself to do any number of things. And this works for stroke patients. The brain wants to learn new things. Although it has to get over some obstacles. Some obstacles could be depression, could be they just don't feel like it. So starting with something small, open the door with your left hand. You start with something small, and then from there you can keep working. Every week you could try something different. But I encourage each of you, even before you go home and tell your significant other to start opening the door with his left hand, or that you do it yourself. Right? We practice what we preach. What I'm telling you are things that I'm doing. That's why there's some energy when I talk about them. You can tell this is not just science. This is my life you're hearing. So I try as I'm brushing my teeth. I use my mouse now, with computer mouse, with my left hand. That took several weeks. Very clumsy. Slows things down. We're all about being efficient. But again, long-term goals. Who do I want to be? I want my brain healthy. When I'm 75, I want a healthy brain. So I'm going to do some things now for the next 3 weeks. It's going to, I'm going to be clumsy with the mouse, but I'm going to be patient with myself. It's going to be slower, and then I'm going to have the benefits later on. So being kind to ourselves. And for a neurosurgeon, that's very difficult. I want to do everything perfectly right away. And all of your professionals here, we want to do everything perfectly right away. We think, well, once we're over 30, we simply can't make silly mistakes. But as my mother says, if you want to do something well, you have to be willing to do it poorly first. If you want to do something well, you've got to be willing to do it poorly at first. And that includes your spiritual life, includes your self-control, includes relationships. Nobody does relationships well. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. They're messy. But finding your way, finding your courage, finding your empathy, being a better person next week than you were last week, or next year than you were last year. That's how you've learned from your mistakes. You've gone through and made your list of the reasons, your best brain, why you made that mistake, and you've gotten insights, and now you're telling that story. In fact, once you get your insights, it's important. As I'm telling you the story, you find someone, you tell them the story, and as you review the story, as I just reviewed with you, you realize, oh, I learned that. And as you tell the story, the words, your left hemisphere, the emotion, your right hemisphere starts to synchronize your brain, and your brain now doesn't have to keep going down that same old rut where he does this, and then you do that, and then you get angry, and always, same old, I can't control my anger. You start to be able to come over and make a new path, a healthier path, to get yourself out of some of these ruts. Let's see here. Well, this is just a very interesting experiment on the tone of voice that surgeons use. They found that they had students judging from the tone of voice. They had a computer program which took the words away and just let them hear the tone, and they were able to predict which surgeon had been sued before, which ones would be liable for lawsuits. And it was the dominant tone and those that had lack of concern. So, which, interestingly enough, the dominant means a deep, loud, moderately fast, clearly articulated speech. It communicates a lack of empathy, that tone. So the tone that you're using, and you think, oh, I've got to use this tone with my kids or my relationship or my patient, or they're not going to, otherwise they don't even look at me. But that tone, actually, if it communicates a lack of empathy, it's probably hurting the relationship. A fast and loud tone increases fear and anxiety, as well as heart rate and blood pressure, they've shown. A slow and soft tone increases sadness and depression. Now, you can use this actually to your benefit, because what they showed in this study is if you're talking about an anxious topic, that if you talk in a fast and loud tone, it actually increases, on the right is blood pressure, increases the blood pressure, And if you talk in a slow or soft tone, it actually comes way down. So this, let's see, right there. So this is, if you talk, this is in the fast and loud tone, right there, and this is the slow and soft tone. So it actually, if you're talking about a topic that is anxiety producing, if you can talk about it slowly and softly, it actually will help bring their heart rate and blood pressure down. Now the same thing actually works for depression. If you're talking about over on the right side here, these are depression self-ratings in the top line. You're talking about a depressed topic. But if you're talking about a depressing topic and you talk about it fast and loud, it doesn't produce as much depression as if you're talking very slowly and sadly about this depressing situation. It actually increases people's depression. So you can use your tone of voice. And one of the things that people say is you can use an incongruent tone to help that. And probably you've noticed it in your experience. If you've had a tragedy and someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, you poor thing, you know, I can't believe he left you," you know, suddenly you're not helping me. Versus, "Oh, that jerk, I can't believe he left you." You know, suddenly there's a difference in that your tone can make. And so how we respond to people in their crisis is important. I had let's see. All right, let's any questions now? We're doing for time. Yes.
A real quick question about what you were just talking about. How do you differentiate between mood incongruence, so you're trying to keep it light, and then seeming like you don't have any empathy and caring?
Well, this is usually after you have already established a relationship. Right? If you come in the room with mood incongruence, you're never going to get the connection, because it's important that for relationship, what was the first thing we learned? Someone's glad to be with me. I've got joy. I've got joy with you. You're glad to be with me. I can tell that. In fact, we have, by the time you're 5 years old, you're able to distinguish between what we call a camera smile, so good to see you, and someone who's genuinely glad to be with you. That a 5-year-old can distinguish that. So you've got, and this is a brain level. This is a subconscious level. I'm feeling joy from you, or I'm not feeling joyful from you. So to be able to convince them, I'm glad to be with you, and then you're sort of using this as almost a psychological ploy you use with a friend or someone you've now gotten to know. So you're helping them recover. But some of you who are very empathetic, just letting you know that using that slow, soft voice to comfort people may not be helping them. Because I've had people do that with me, and it's really disturbing to me. I want them to go away, and I don't know why. Now I know why. They're trying to be as helpful as possible. It's not working. So, other questions? Yeah.
I was reading the front part of the book where you offer thanks to your dad. I was confused when you have given him the extra letter and he responded that. But what he did afterwards that really...
Good question. So my father, the question is, what happened with my dad, our relationship? Well, it was after I sort of started on this path of following Jesus, and reading the scriptures, I came across the 10 Commandments, and the fifth one, which is written a couple of times in the scriptures, in Deuteronomy 5:16, it says, "Honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you, that you may enjoy a long life on the earth." And I could say categorically that, turning that around, ask yourself, is it well with you? And I would have said no. So this says, honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you. Deuteronomy 5:16. And so I had to ask myself, well, what is honor? What is that? Because it doesn't say you have to love them or like them. It says you have to honor them. So we can't necessarily honor their malfunctions, I'll say, or their offenses. If someone has done offensive things or is abusive, you can't really honor that about them, but you can always honor the good things about them, and everyone has those good things. As I said, it's easy to find the dirt. All my childhood and most of my adult life, I focused on his dirt, what was wrong with him. But I started looking about what I did get. You know, he did fix things around the house, and guess what? I fixed things in people's brains. There was something that I did get from him. And I began honoring him. I began calling once a week. That was very unfulfilling for me because I wanted to talk about emotional issues. My father did not have the range. He did not have that ability. He was from the old country or from whatever, and that's just not something. He didn't get from his father also what he wanted. So generationally, in fact, I don't know of any family member who, after the child went through their teenage years, has a good relationship with the father. I don't know anyone from my family. In the generation, my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, all the kids have never had a good relationship with their father. And ironically, I descend from the biblical tribe of Levi, from one of Jacob's 12 sons. My last name is Levi, is Levy. And so as you go back even and read the Bible stories about Jacob and his sons, they didn't get along with their father. And Jacob was not the favorite of his father, Isaac. And so the story from way, way, way back, fathers and children have never been getting along well. But I decided that what he wanted to talk about, which was the car and the weather and the computer, was what we were going to talk about. Because that honored him. He felt if I listened to him talk about how the car was running, that was important to him. I thought it was ridiculous when it doesn't matter to me, but that mattered to him. And that there are different stages of relationship. And the fact stage is the stage that most of us are comfortable with as men. That's why we're always talking about football scores, baseball scores. The fact stage. Very superficial, but very comfortable for us. And so as my father was able to talk about the facts of how the car was running or the computer was running, that made him feel joyful, loved, cherished. That I was glad to be with him, listening to him once a week. And that, I believe, really helped. Now, when we talk about forgiveness, and forgiveness, I believe, is not a once and for all transaction. And for me, it certainly wasn't. It's not 6 months go by when there's something else I discover that I need to forgive my father for again. I'm not, that was a lie too. That was not right. He didn't say it, but by the way he lived, it seemed that things were worth more than people. And that is how I structured my life for a good portion of it. And so I realized, when I recognize the ramifications, when you sow seeds along your life, they bear fruit later on that can be very painful to. And so as I see some of the fruit, I forgive him again. Because what I don't want to do is hang on to resentment. And it's a good time to talk about what resentment does to us. It really hurts our physical bodies, hurts our vessels, hurts our hearts. I began studying some of the ramifications of bitterness and resentment. I took a sabbatical and I wanted to learn about healing, about how people heal. And I began doing some reading and found this whole research field about bitterness and resentment. And a patient came to see me, and his name was Ron. He was this massive man. Arms were as big as my legs. Worked for the Border Patrol, crew cut. He had a problem with the vessels in his brain, but he also had arthritis of his neck and his back and his legs and his hips. And whenever I hear someone with a lot of problems like that, I begin thinking, I wonder if this is more than just this physical problem. I wonder if there's some emotional, relational, spiritual problem here. And by spiritual problem, the lowest hanging fruit is generally bitterness or resentment. The inability to forgive someone who's hurt you. And that because it's so common, and everyone can think of someone who's offended you. It's just difficult to forgive people who've done you a disservice. And that was my pathway with my father. So I explained to him how we were going to fix this problem in the brain, and then I said, look, Ron, we know that I really want you to heal from this surgery, so I want to make sure your immune system is tuned up. And we know that emotions affect your health. I was kind of backing into this. And then I said, is there anyone that you need to forgive? Someone you can't forgive? All of a sudden, he gets this real angry look on his face. He starts to, like the Hulk, starts puffing up like this. And I'm on my little rolling doctor stool. I'm rolling back away from the wall. And I get my back to the wall, and he finally drops his head. He said, my mother. And my father left when I was young, and my mom moved from place to place, and she lived with guys who would drink, and they would beat her up. And I hated seeing that. And when I was 12, I got between the two of them, and I got beat up myself. I got, pushed down the stairs, and I picked myself up. And I said, "Come on, Mom, let's get out of here." She said, "No, I'm not leaving." She stayed with that abusive man. I have hated her for 30 years. Wow, that's what I'm looking for. Because I can understand why you would feel that way, but I have to tell you, it's killing me. That your desire to hurt someone for hurting you is hurting you. Bitterness is like poison that we drink and we hope someone else dies. It is something that just destroys us. And it's easy to talk about, very difficult to do. But I said, Ron, I want to ask you to do something very courageous. I'd like to ask you to, if you're ready to let this go, it's been 30 years, if you're ready to let this go, I'd like to ask you to forgive her. But I tell you what, you're here in my office, I'd like to help you with that, something I want to help you do. But only if you're ready to let it go. And it was quiet. You never want to push someone to forgive. This is a very personal, very sensitive issue. And it took a while, and he finally said, I'm ready. I've had this long enough. I'm going to let it go. And so I took him through a declaration of forgiveness. And actually, that is it's a chapter in the book, and you can sort of read through that. Basically releasing his mother from judgment. Because there's a judge not that you not be judged. Many of us know that. That's one of the sayings of Jesus. When we judge others, we set ourselves up to have to live a perfect life. Because if I'm a judgment of you, now I'm going to make sure you can't criticize me. And so as we release our judgments toward the people, suddenly it frees us up to actually enjoy our lives more. So holding our judgment, and these are very subtle and very easy to do. It's very easy to judge my father. It's very easy to judge my boss. It's very easy to judge the neighbor. And as we release our judgments and forgive them, it actually clears our mind up to make more constructive decisions. It seems like we're they're getting off the hook. But ultimately, forgiveness is for us. It is something that we have to do because we want to be free. Forgiveness can be done for health reasons alone, and probably should be done for health reasons alone. But forgiveness is a very spiritual experience, and all of the major religions talk about forgiveness. It's just a big part of enjoying your life. It seems that a religious base for forgiveness has a little bit more power because there's something about forgiveness that seems that you're essentially putting in God's hands justice. Because forgiveness doesn't feel like justice. It feels like they're getting away with it and you're suffering. And so having a spiritual basis for it where there is justice in the universe can be very helpful with forgiveness. And some studies have shown that a spiritual based forgiveness, that God has forgiven you, so we need to pass it along, has a little bit more power than just trying to gut it out and do it yourself. But either way, there is power there. So I took Ron through this declaration of forgiveness, and then when someone forgives, I don't want to miss an opportunity to say, as my mother said to me, Ron, is there anything you need to be forgiven for? Because that's what happens, isn't it? People hurt us, and the next thing we do is, right, hurt somebody else. That is so maybe not the same way, but we justify it very, very quickly and easily because we hurt ourselves. We smoke or eat or get in relationships we shouldn't. It comes out somewhere. And as we forgive, we seem to start cleaning some of that up. And so, Ron received forgiveness for himself. He had a religious background. He was raised Baptist. He wasn't going to church. And so Jesus was a very powerful model of forgiveness, because here's a man who's crucified on the cross, and he's forgiving the people that are doing it. I mean, just something that really is mind-blowing when you think about that wouldn't have been what I would be thinking about if I was suffering. And so there's a lot of power in that model for that spiritual background. So I finished with Ron. He started weeping because forgiveness is very powerful emotionally. But when we finished, his whole countenance had changed. His face was smiling. And I said, Ron, how do you feel? And he said, I feel like calling my mother. It's been 30 years, but I feel like calling my mother. And he did call her, and she was, they had a reunion, and things were, we're getting back together. And I got to play a part in that because I asked a difficult question. So asking, first of all, getting yourselves tuned up with forgiveness. And then getting your patient's family members, I think a true friend. Many of us listen to complaints over and over about someone's ex or someone's husband or someone's boss, and it may be a true mark of friendship to say, I've been hearing about that now for a long time. I've been empathizing with you, but I think that's actually hurting you. Can we forgive? Can we do this together? And there is something powerful about doing it together. Because so many of us have heard about forgiveness, and we know we should forgive, but let me tell you, it's easy to talk about, very difficult to do. But if someone says, hey, look, let's do it together, I'll do this with you, because together we can do it. And something about speaking out the words, there's something about saying it that also has power. Some of these people I have to forgive over and over and over again. Because I made a habit of reviewing their offenses over and over and over again every time I've heard their name or I've seen them. But if you can think about someone, when you think about them, something sort of twists in your heart. You just don't like it. You don't like to see them successful. You don't like to see them complimented. You don't like to see life going well for them. Or maybe even someone who's dead. They've hurt you, and you still cannot get over that. But forgiveness always is a way through that. And to get people who can help you do that is also something that's really positive. But just even noticing it in your life. I actually want to take 3 minutes now, 30 to just give you about a minute. I want you to if there's some people that are going to come to mind now for you, I want you to just jot them down. It's such an important thing for us as caregivers to detect bitterness or resentment in our own lives so that we can be tuned up spiritually so that we can then give it to others. We'll give you about a minute here. some of you, if you're, if you were in my office, like Ron, and you wanted to forgive, I don't want to leave you without this opportunity to sort of do it. There is power in doing things like this corporately. Sometimes there's more power in doing it individually, but I want you to, I'll just go through this with you of how I would do it with someone. So those of you, most of us, well, I can tell everyone, has got someone they need to forgive. Even if you feel that you've forgiven before, this is common humanity. And the more gifted you are, the more talented you are, the more beautiful you are, the more people are going to line up to offend you. So if you're someone who seems to have these deep offenses, God has put in you something very, very special. And there's a force against you trying to keep you down, trying to knock that out of you. But you are a very special person, very unique. And so as these waves come at you, you've got to learn to forgive. You've got to get this shield up so that you can block some of that negativity and really experience the reason God put you on this earth. Your design is hidden there. And I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to forgive. So let's think about a person that we want to forgive, and I'm just going to go. Let's just go through this declaration, this verbal declaration. I believe that as we declare things, it has power. So let's just say this together. I choose to forgive with all my heart for the things that they did and the things that they didn't do that hurt me. Specifically, I forgive them for. Now, I want you just the next 30 seconds, specifically. The more specific, the better. When we say, oh, I forgive them for everything, it doesn't have the same effect as saying, especially the time they did this. And using words like betrayal, abandonment, rejection, fear. These are the ones, especially the betrayals. They were supposed to take care of me. My dad was supposed to teach me. He was supposed to help me, and he didn't. Or especially when there's abuse from someone you're supposed to trust. These are huge issues. And so to say, I'm forgiving them for that betrayal. Essentially, those of us who want to use the spiritual route, you'd say, God, you have forgiven me for everything. I need to pass this along. And I'm going to trust you that there's justice here. And you're going to take care of me, and you're going to take care of justice for them. I'm going to give you 30 seconds or a minute right now. Specifically the things that you're forgiven for. All right, let's just continue. I forgive them with all my heart. Forgive them with all my heart. I place them in the hands of God. And I am confident that God will treat them according to his justice. He doesn't need my help. He will also treat them with mercy. Same way he treats me. But I drop any desire for vengeance. And knowing all that this has cost me, I just want you to think for a moment what this has cost you. Because when we forgive, we have to take an account. And it's painful to think. And if this is, it's not easy. This is a very awkward, it should grate, it should sort of feel difficult. I believe that we are most like God when we are forgiving. You think we're most like God at the soup kitchen, right? That's good stuff. But this is godly. And for those of us who want to be more like God, it's the ability to forgive. And to know your identity, your true identity, and to be able to pass it along. This, I believe, is supernatural. This is not just a natural thing we're doing. When we forgive, it's supernatural. Think what it's cost you. And let's continue. Knowing all that this has cost me, I cancel their debts to me. They owe me nothing. They don't owe me an apology. Don't need to change their behavior. Owe me absolutely nothing. And I owe them nothing. Except to love them as God instructs. God, please forgive me for my resentment and anger. And heal my heart. And tell me your truth about this situation. I just want you to close your eyes. I want you to listen for some truth and write it down. If there's a word or a message or a verse or a picture, you just write it down. I want you to hear it. When we forgive, there's a power, and I believe God really moves close to us because it's such a, it's the currency of God's kingdom to give people what they don't deserve. As we extend that, He moves very close. He's close to the humble. It takes humility and courage to forgive. And I believe that I am never more like Jesus than when I forgive. Forgiveness is an enormous theme. We don't have time to go through it, but I'm going to stop there. If we have one question, then Bob wants to say something. We need to finish up. The lunches are coming in here. But if there a question or something, then we need to. Sure.
You're almost becoming like spiritual leader for the people that are in this profession. And that is amazing today. And this is a good one. I wanted to know how many people have been impacted like you? Do you know what percentage of people are working like you are? Not just spiritually related to Christianity, but
No, I don't know the answer to that. I know there are. This is a growing field because people are just in the last 10 years there are more studies coming out on prayer. There are more, I know Peter has written a book on prayer ministry. He's a physician, so there. In fact, Bob's got things on forgiveness as well. There are a lot of people in this field now that are moving in this direction, recognizing it is still. There's not a lot of money in it, so it's not attracting, it's not a technology-driven field, it's a compassion-driven field. And so I would say, it's unusual for someone to sort of turn their life around and make the changes necessary. And because there's also cost involved. The longer you've been doing something, the harder it is to change. That's why so often the decisions we make when we're younger really do affect us later on. The decisions you're making today are affecting who you are in 10 years. So I don't know the answer about harm, but I think the number is growing.
But this is so powerful. I'm totally convinced that it is powerful.
Thank you.
For the people that's being treated by you and whoever else is doing this kind of work.
Thank you. Yes.
Do you give talks to other groups of people, physicians in the community? I know people who benefit from hearing me speak, that's why I wanted
I gave a talk Cleveland gave a talk on Wednesday at a church in Kingwood, and then I spoke yesterday at Institute for Spiritual Health, set up a doctor's luncheon. There was a psychotherapist meeting in the morning. So, yeah, a number of places.
How about around San Diego?
I do speak around San Diego. I speak to some medical students and some different churches. Well, I appreciate your attention. It's just been a blessing to be with you. Thanks so much.